in case it doesn't work out where he comes back in June or July. And maybe that's the trade deadline. Maybe you can use that for that at that point. But I would like to see them just buckle down with one more starter. And they need a left-handed reliever. They don't really have any. Jerry Blevins was brought back on a minor league deal, and as a guy who certainly had success in the past, but really has profiled as a lefty-lefty guy, especially now at this point in his career. Justin Wilson, I think, did a really good job for them the last couple of seasons, and I wouldn't mind seeing him come back. But if you can take a shot at Brad Hand, spend a little extra money on getting a guy like that to be your left-handed reliever, I think that could work too. So they definitely need that. I would say the left-handed reliever is maybe the number one item that the Mets might need right now.
I find it funny that everybody in the league passed on Brad Hand. He cleared waivers, and nobody picked him up. Really weird. And you see Blake Trinan getting such a big deal. A couple of relievers just went off the board. Are you surprised that the Mets didn't sign Hand, or was it just that it was the old regime and it's just a new regime that going forward now?
Yeah, Sandy addressed that in the introductory press conference when Steve Cohen was announced as the new owner. That it was something that had Steve Cohen gotten all the T's crossed and the I's dotted a few days earlier, they probably would have picked up Brad Hand when he was available through waivers there. So I think that they certainly have interest and would have had interest then. And it was just kind of that strange transition period that precluded the Mets at that time from signing him.
And then another big question is Edwin Diaz. What kind of Edwin Diaz are we going to get? In 2019, his ERA was 5.5 with a whip of 1.38. And last year, his ERA and whip was great, and he struck out almost half the guys he saw. The question is going to be, how long of a leash is Luis Rojas going to give Diaz because of the fact that they're expected to do well, and if Edwin Diaz doesn't do well in the beginning, they do have a possible closer in Seth Lugo who could fill in, or if they sign Brad Hand or someone like that, someone can fill in for him.
Yeah, they certainly have options, I would think, in their bullpen. Maybe even Trevor May profiles as an option. They still have Familia. They still have Betances. So they'll have options. But I think that Edwin Diaz, his stuff is so much better than everybody else's. I mean, in baseball even, you would say that his stuff from the right side is as good as anyone's in the game as a reliever. We saw the strikeouts in 2019 as well. He still had 100 strikeouts that year too. It wasn't exactly what he did in 2020. His strikeout numbers were even ridiculous for him last year. But we saw the high strikeout number. We just saw all the home runs allowed, and that's really what killed him. And it's so strange with Diaz because even though in 2020 he only gave up, I think, 3 home runs, but they were all just backbreakers for the Mets. Every single one came in a spot where a home run would have just buried them. And
I heard you call them.
Yeah, it's kind of what we saw in 2019 too, where every single home run was in the ninth inning in a big moment. There were no garbage home runs that he gave up, and I think that's going to still kind of be a black cloud over him as the season gets going, and the Mets will have to watch for that. I do think it helped him to not have any fans in attendance because I think that the pressure did get to him at times in 2019. So I think he was able to lock in a little bit more in 2020 and get a lot of that junk out of his head to make him have the good year that he did.
Yeah, interesting with the fans. Of course, the Miami Marlins really was the same thing both ways. They hardly have any fans. Anyways, anyways, on to minor leagues. Maybe you can talk a little bit about maybe a minor leaguer or two that might come up and have an impact on this 2021 Mets ball club.
Yeah, the really good, I think, Mets prospects right now are the guys who are still a little bit further away. I mean, Mauricio is a guy that everybody points to as being the top prospect, and Francisco Alvarez is a catcher, and I think Brody Van Wagenen's crew did a really good job of drafting. Look at Brett Beatty and Matthew Allen and PCA. Everybody likes Pete Crow Armstrong. So there's all these guys that are near the top of the Mets prospect chain, but they're all kind of a couple of years away. So, as far as anybody who's going to make an impact on 2021, I don't know, Thomas Sapaki might be a guy, a lefty that stands out. We talked about the need for left-handers in the organization. He's a guy that could be someone to think about. They gave a pretty good chunk of change to Sam McWilliams coming from the Rays system, and he's not someone that you think of even as a prospect off the top of your head, but an older guy, but someone who certainly has some skill, and I think could make some noise out of the bullpen in 2021. Franklin Colome, we saw him a couple of times in 2020. Maybe he's someone they can rely on a little bit more. But as far as anyone who could potentially make a serious impact at the major league level, well, I think all those guys are still, minimum a year or two away.
Yeah, Zepecki is interesting. Do you see him as being a spot starter for the Mets somewhere in the middle of the season if there's injuries, or do you see him as shoring up the bullpen if we don't like the mix?
Yeah, I would think for Zepecki, it'd probably be more of a spot starter and getting those opportunities. But, you never really know how it's going to shake out. Maybe they do throw him into the pen and it does work out. But I would think that the way things have profiled for Zepecki to this point, he's got some good stuff, and he's a guy that I think can get hitters out. But I don't know that he has the secondary stuff necessarily to be some kind of lockdown reliever.
Well, the question I think really comes to play is where's Steven Matz in all this? Is he going to be a starter? He didn't look that good out of the bullpen, and is he going to be able to figure it out this year?
Never really had a chance out of the bullpen. Well, they only pitched out of the pen a few times, and that was after he had come back from the injury. Listen, Steven, this is his last year under team control. He's going to be a free agent after 2021, just like Syndergaard and Conforto and Lindor. So you can kind of rank those guys and see where Steven is right now. But I think that they've tried everything with Matz. They've tried different pitching coaches. They've tried different sorts of, numbers and spin rates and things to throw at him and to try to get him to understand what he's good at, what he's not good at. And nothing seems to click with Steven. In fact, I think it's only gotten worse here as time has gone on. And now one of his best friends is his catcher. They bring in James McCann. They didn't bring him in because he's Steven Matz's best friend, but it helps. And they hope it helps at least. And they think that relationship between Matz and McCann will be able to get Steven driving in the right direction. If there's any incentive for him as far as making money, he could have a good year and all of a sudden, be someone who does get a good contract, gets $50 or $60 million after 2021 is over. That's not out of the question at all for Steven Matz. So I think that if, the motivations I'm sure will be there. They always are for Steven. He's a great guy. He's just, I think, tough on himself, and he really beats himself up in a way that I think holds him back ultimately because he gets too deep into his own head.
Yeah, funny how things go. I mean, look at Liam Hendricks. He was DFA'd 2 years ago, and now he ends up with a $54 million contract just signed with the White Sox. So let's go around the room for this one. Who do you think is the most underrated player on the ball club this year? Let's start with you, Wayne.
That's a good question. There's a lot of changes. It very well could be Carlos Carrasco because as we talked about at the beginning, he's viewed as just this throw-in starting pitching depth option for them, and quite frankly, he's probably their number 2 starter. He's a guy who's had mid-3, low-3 ERA last year, under 3 throughout most of his career as a major league starter, especially since right around the middle of the last decade. So I think Carlos Carrasco, as somebody who has kind of been under the radar as an almost a de facto ace for that Cleveland staff, comes in without much fanfare and could very easily be that number 2 guy right behind Jacob deGrom that the Mets really need. So you could point to him and say that he's certainly underrated. I always think Michael Conforto is underrated. I think people don't really understand how good of a player Michael is. This is a free agent year coming up for him, and he did have a terrific 2 months in 2020. So I think if Conforto just kind of continues on from what he did, maybe suddenly he'll become the real star, or at least the real sought-after player that I think he should be.
Yeah, those were two of my answers as well. Carrasco, he had that bout with leukemia, but he came back blazing with the same high 20 strikeout rate, 10K per 9 strikeouts low walk rate, walks about 2 batters per game. So yeah, I agree with that. And Conforto, he's a guy who has legitimate 40 home run upside. And last year he traded some of that for line drives, and he was successful in raising his batting average. And of course, Michael Conforto just got engaged 2 days ago. So congrats and mazel tov to you, Michael. Ruvain, what's your selection for most underrated player on the Mets this year?
I think the most underrated is Seth Lugo. He is one of the people who can fill in the rotation. If they stretch him out, he can be closer. He did very well when he did that. And it really depends on where the Mets go the rest of this offseason. If they get another reliever and they can't afford another starting pitcher, he'll go start. If they get another starter, they don't go reliever, then he can go into the bullpen. So he's a real wild card, and he's usually in the game pitching against the other team's best hitters. Yes, Diaz pitches usually the 9th inning, but they usually try to get Lugo against the best hitters, and I think that's why he's very underrated and why he's so important to the team. Now, basing on that, if he's in the rotation, if he's in the bullpen, wherever he is, Wayne, do you think the Mets have enough firepower to match and possibly overtake the Braves as the best team in the National League East this year?
You know, it's. I think Atlanta, they've made such smart moves themselves. You know, they really rely heavily on their bullpen, which they continue to bolster. They've obviously got a great lineup, although we don't really know where Marcell Ozuna is going to end up yet and how the Braves might figure in replacing him. But I do think the Mets have done a lot here to put themselves back into that conversation, and I think that it's there for them. I don't think the Mets are far behind at all. If they are, you know, it's probably very slight right now, and the Mets aren't done. You know, we know that their off season is going to continue here. You know, maybe they will sign Trevor Bauer. I mean, we don't really know what the Mets have in tow here. I mean, if they sign Brad Hand, well, I think that that inches them even closer to the Braves. So they're not going to come in and just steamroll, I don't think. I think the Phillies are going to be good. I think Washington's going to be good. We saw Miami play above expectations certainly last year. So I think it's still a very strong division. But I think the Mets are doing as much as they can to immediately thrust themselves into the playoff conversation for next year or for this year.
Yeah, one of the toughest divisions in all of baseball. Let's end with a personal question, Wayne. Maybe what's your favorite or maybe most exciting professional broadcasting moment of your career thus far?
That's a good question. You know, I've had a couple of good ones as far as being with the Mets. You know, my first year was 2015, and at that time, you know, I was doing pregame and postgame, but I also was filling in on play-by-play whenever Howie or Josh Lewin were off. And one time Josh was doing a Charger game during the National League Division Series. So, you know, the Mets-Dodgers tied at 1. It was the first game at Citi Field, first playoff game ever at Citi Field. You know, the Ruben Tejada thing had just happened. You know, Chase Utley was booed out of the borough. And it was just a wild night. And, you know, one of the innings that I got to call was when Yoenis Cespedes just bombed a 3-run homer to kind of put the game, even though it was early, kind of put the game out of reach at that point. The place just went ballistic. So that's one. And 1A is probably Pete Alonso's 53rd homer in 2019. And what a special moment to call in his rookie year. It was my first year, too, as the full-time partner of Howie's. And to have that call that night, you know, when everybody was ready to see Pete break this record and get over top of Aaron Judge. You know, I'll never forget really either of those nights at Citi Field. They were both pretty special.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for being on the show. You can follow Wayne on Twitter at Wayne Randazzo. Make it simple like that. And, of course, you can hear him broadcast on the radio on the Mets Network when games are and hopefully they will get started on time. So we're rooting for that, Wayne. Yeah,
me too. Hope so. I appreciate you guys having me on tonight, and I look forward to talking to you guys again.
Our pleasure. Thanks a lot. Once again, I'm Ariel Cohen. You can follow me on Twitter at ATCNY, and you can follow Ruvain at MLB Injury Guru. And, of course, you can follow our podcast here at beat_shift_pod. From all of us here at the Fangraphs Beat the Shift podcast, see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.